The devotees who packed into the small courthouse that winter afternoon weren't there to watch just another murder trial. They were there to watch a faith be judged. It was January 25th, 2026. Outside, in the lanes of coastal Andhra, temple bells rang as they did every day. Inside, in a packed sessions court, people leaned forward so they wouldn't miss a single word when the judge finally spoke the name everyone had learned to fear: Valanki Simhadri. To the law, he was just another accused, a 42-year-old man in a crumpled shirt, eyes fixed on the floor. East Godavari, and West Godavari districts, he was something far worse. They called him the Prasadam Serial Killer, because unlike most killers, he didn't use guns or knives in dark alleys. He used temple food prasadam, the holy offering people accept, with bowed heads and closed eyes as his murder weapon. And for almost 2 years, no one even realized people were being murdered at all. In India, prasadam is more than food. It's trust you can touch. It's a sweet, a handful of rice, a pinch of ladus, something that has been offered to God, then shared as blessing among devotees. You don't ask who cooked it. Between February 2018 and October 2019, a quiet storm swept through temple towns across Andhra Pradesh. In Krishna, East Godavari, and West Godavari districts, police records would later show a strange pattern: middle-aged men and women collapsing suddenly near temples and bus stands, strangers seen with them just before, bodies with bluish lips, froth at the mouth, and no obvious injuries. Most deaths were written off as heart attacks, strokes, or sudden illness. Poor families cremated their dead quickly. At the center of this pattern was a man who looked like any other small-time traitor, Valanki Simhadri, also known as Shiva. He had no obvious criminal aura. No gang, no weapons, no flashy lifestyle. What he did have was crushing detand an idea. Somewhere he had heard about another killer from the south, Cyanide Mohan in Karnataka, later Cyanide Jolly in Kerala. The people who used cyanide-laced offerings and food to quietly erase their victims. Then he added his own twist. His stage would be temples, his prop would be prasadam. He prowled crowded pilgrimage spots, bus stands near famous shrines, small roadside temples where people arrived alone. His ideal targets were those traveling by themselves, widows with gold bangles, farmers carrying cash to buy fertilizer, laborers with the little jewelry they owned carefully hidden under their clothes. He'd start with a conversation, soft-spoken, friendly, in their own dialect. He claimed to be a devotee who knew special rituals for wealth, marriage, or health. For some, he played a tantric. For others, just a pious man who knew the right way to get God's attention. When he sensed trust, he made the offer that would later give him his name. "Let's offer a special prasadam together," he'd say, "Miracle prasadam. If you eat this from my hand after the puja, your wish will come true." Some victims followed him inside the temple, as others met him near a small shrine or a secluded corner. There, he would pull out what looked like ordinary prasadam, a bit of sweet, a pinch of rice, something innocuous. What his victims didn't know was that just before taking their portion aside, he had mixed in a tiny amount of cyanide, just enough to kill. They ate with eyes closed, whispering their wishes. Within minutes, the poison acted. Victims began to feel dizzy, nauseous. As they collapsed, Simhadri did what he had really come for. He slipped off their gold chains and bangles, took their cash, rifled through bags and pockets. Then he walked away just another devotee, disappearing into the crowd, leaving bystanders to assume the worst. Poor soul. Must have had a heart attack. Deaths that were actually murders melted into statistics of natural causes. The turning point came when patterns became too loud to ignore. By late 2019, police in 3 districts were staring at an uncomfortable cluster of cases. Middle-aged or elderly people, many of them wearing gold, collapsing suddenly near temples and bus stands. No signs of violence, but families insisting their relatives had been healthy hours earlier. When postmortems were done, some doctors noted telltale signs: the smell of bitter almonds, internal organ damage that didn't quite fit a normal heart attack. Somewhere in one of those mortuaries, a forensic pathologist wrote a single word in their report that changed everything: cyanide. Once cyanide entered the frame, police theories shifted. Cyanide isn't something villagers casually access. It's a controlled substance. If multiple bodies in different districts all showed signs of cyanide poisoning, there had to be someone moving between them, someone who had access to the poison and, to the victims. The Andhra Pradesh police formed a special team. They sat around tables covered in files, marking victim ages, locations, dates. Slowly, a grim map emerged. Krishna East Godavari, Davri. February 2018 to October 2019, and, in witness statements, one name began to repeat. A soft-spoken man who called himself Shiva, who had been seen with some of the dead just hours before they fell. He was always Shiva from Vijayawada, or Shiva the devotee. No one knew his full name, but someone remembered a bus, another remembered a tea stall. Bank CCTV caught a blurred image of a man helping an older woman, later found dead, withdraw cash. Separate pieces of a puzzle that, when overlaid, made the same face. In early November 2019, police laid a trap near a busy temple where they suspected he might strike again. Officers in plain clothes watched the crowd while another team kept an eye on bus arrivals. When a man matching their composite sketch began chatting with a lone devotee, leading her away from the main crowd with the promise of special blessings, they moved in. Inside his bag, officers found what they had feared and expected: temple sweets, powdered substances in small packets, and a vial of cyanide. The Prasadam killer had finally been pulled out of the crowd. Interrogation turned the suspicion into something far darker. Under questioning, Simhadri didn't just admit to one poisoning. He began to talk about many. According to investigators, he calmly walked them through his method, spotting vulnerable devotees, befriending them, lacing miracle Prasadam with cyanide, and stripping their bodies of cash and jewelry once they collapsed. He spoke about different districts, different temples, different victims, so many that officers had to stop him and ask for dates and locations so they could even begin to cross-check. In the end, police announced that he had murdered at least 10 people in 2 years using cyanide-laced Prasadam, targeting temples and public places in Krishna, East Godavari, and West Godavari between February 2018 and October 16, 2019. If the cyanide part sounded eerily familiar, it was because India had already seen a similar monster in Karnataka a few years earlier, Cyanide Mohan, who killed women by giving them cyanide pills disguised as contraceptives. News channels quickly slapped a label on the undercase: the Prasadam Serial Killer, or Under Cyanide Killer. For villagers who lost mothers, fathers, uncles, and aunts, the label didn't matter. What mattered was that the thing haunting their temples at last had a name and a face. Then began the slow, grinding march of justice. The forensic work was painstaking. In many cases, bodies had long been cremated. Where exhumation was possible, scientists scraped soil and bone, hunting for residual traces of cyanide. In others, they relied on medical records, eyewitness accounts, and the pattern of theft. Prosecutors dug out bank statements to show how, shortly after a sudden death, someone had used the victim's ATM card. CCTV footage stitched together timelines. A devotee entering a temple with Simhadri by their side, him walking out alone minutes before the victim collapsed outside. In court, the atmosphere was raw. Families traveled from remote villages to testify. A son described how his father had gone to a temple to pray for his crop, wearing the last chain the family hadn't sold and never come home. A widow explained how a kind man had offered to perform a special puja for her husband's health, only for her to wake up hours later on the hospital floor, her husband dead, her own gold gone. Again and again, the same two details surfaced: a stranger named Shiva, and a piece of Prasadam, given privately, away from the crowd. Simhadri's lawyers tried every angle. They claimed coincidence, argued that poor record-keeping meant police were stitching unrelated deaths together, suggested that some confessions had been obtained under pressure. But cyanide is a hard thing to explain away. Where forensic reports showed the poison, where surveillance cameras placed him with victims, where his own statements matched locations, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whatever doubts existed around individual deaths, there was no doubt that at least some of those temple collapses were not acts of God. They were acts of one man. Which brings us back to that January afternoon in 2026. By then, the case had dragged on for years. Temples he once haunted had reopened with tighter controls. Villages had switched from blind trust to quiet suspicion. People looked at Prasadam differently. In the front row of the courtroom sat families who had waited since 2018 for someone to say, officially, that what happened to their loved ones was not just fate. The judge read out the case numbers, the sections, the findings. In at least some of the murders, he said, the prosecution had proven its case beyond reasonable doubt. That Valanki Simhadri had administered cyanide-laced prasadam to unsuspecting devotees with the intention of killing them, and then robbed their bodies. He spoke about betrayal of faith, about how the accused had used religion itself as camouflage for greed, about the cold and calculated nature of a killer who chose one of the most sacred acts in Hindu worship as his delivery system. The exact wording of the sentence would make headlines and legal commentary. For the people in that room, one word mattered more than any number of years: guilty. In a way, the verdict wasn't just on one man. It was on a wound that had cut right through the heart of everyday faith in small-town India. It acknowledged that what had happened in those temples wasn't random tragedy. It was a serial crime, carried out by someone who understood exactly how much trust lives inside a pinch of prasadam and how easy it is to poison both. Out in the courtyards of Undra's temples, bells continued to ring and devotees continued to line up for offerings, palms open, eyes closed. But somewhere, buried under habit and hope, lives a quiet, lingering question planted by the Prasadam serial killer.